Have you ever been judged in China? Have you ever felt as if others were judging you? You could feel judged by your classmates, coworkers, friends, or even your partner. Well, if you have had the feeling, chances are that people have indeed judged you before, but chances are that you have also judged others, which I understand because judging and being judged are two sides of the same coin. But what we often ignore is that judging others doesn't say as much about the person being judged as it says about yourself. But I didn't come up with an episode about judgment just to lay a guilt trip on you about being judgmental. But instead, I can show you how questioning your own biases and prejudice can actually help you become a more compassionate person. In my case, for example, I used to judge talkative people. Yeah, people that talk too much. And also, I remember complaining and gossiping about this one teacher I had in college who would love to make fun of international students in class. More specifically, make fun of Westerners, and I simply couldn't take it anymore. And when I mentioned these things to my therapist, she gave me the most shocking but also the most eye-opening lesson about judgment. So keep listening if you want to know how judgment almost made me lose some really good friends. Welcome to China University. This is Chunsi, your student advisor. In this podcast, I will not only talk about the many professional, academic, and personal growth opportunities this country has to offer, but also I'll mention some of the major obstacles foreign students encounter while living in China. I'll share my experience, thoughts, and opinions along with some realistic advice and genuine encouragement. Also, remember that you can now listen to full episodes not only on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcast, and where you can find me as China University Student Advisor. But you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as China University Podcast and Twitter as chinauniversitypodcast. If you have any feedback, comments, or topic ideas, please feel free to contact me on your favorite social media platform or send an email to chinapodcast@outlook.com. Anyway, welcome to today's episode, Being Judged in China. So, what is judgment according to you? Do you even remember when was the last time you judged someone? Probably not, right? Especially when we live in a world in where we have to make decisions all the time and assess situations, or in other words, rely on our judgment to choose the most favorable option. So the thing is that when the pandemic started, I began having so many thoughts and doubts about the way I judged situations and people. I was constantly asking myself, am I a jerk for having a negative view on X topic or X situation? But my therapist explained to me that judging is essentially a natural human behavior, and that judging in itself is not wrong, but the type of judging that we want to stay away from is the type of judgment that is based on prejudice, meaning judgment based on preconceived opinions or often unreasonable expectations. Now, in addition to that, I think that your intentions will determine whether your judgment is just an observation, comment, or remark about situations or people. And toxic, ill-intentioned judgments. I also believe that people are often, if not always, unaware of the harm judgment can cause to others. I guess that's why it's so easy to gossip and judge others for the way they dress, talk, eat, or behave, or interact with others. And what is China but a place full of people with different customs, traditions, and cultural backgrounds? That's why I always try to be vigilant of my own biases, reassess situations, and seek for traces of prejudice within my own judgment. Because otherwise, judgment can make you miss really good opportunities in life, and it can definitely make you miss great opportunities in China. So let me begin with this story. When I was 18 years old, I got my first job at this American cable company. I was working the night shift, and even though I appreciated the opportunity they gave me to work there, I gotta say that if the workload wouldn't kill you, the boredom would. And the customers, God, when customers call you at 3 a.m., it's not going to be to tell you about how great the company is and how happy they are with the service. So you can imagine the type of crap that I had to deal with. By the way, this doesn't count as a tangent because it's an introduction to my story. I have my tangents under control, so chill. Anyway, besides the pulled pork empanadas and the hot chocolate they sold at the cafeteria, my biggest motivation to go to work day in and day out was my co-workers. I loved my co-workers. They were so creative and interesting, and I don't think they'll ever know how much they meant to me. But there was one thing about some of them that would really puzzle me sometimes. And that was how some of them were extremely judgmental and gossipy, especially towards people they knew very little about. And there was this one guy in my department that people would often judge for the weird stuff he would do. But honestly, all the weird stuff he would do would make perfect sense to me. For example, he would not shake hands with people, and he would only eat lunch in the bathroom. First of all, the no handshakes thing makes perfect sense to me, and I wish I would have started the practice before the pandemic, because before the pandemic started, I would always catch a cold, get the flu, or the one that I would always get in China, bacterial pneumonia. I would get any of them 2 or 3 times a year. After COVID started almost 3 years ago, do you know how many times I've gotten sick? 2 times only. 2 times in 3 years. 3 years of using hand sanitizer and masks. I had lots of fist bumps, but very little handshakes. So, now regarding my coworker eating in the bathroom, yeah, that didn't make sense to me at all at first. One day I found him in the bathroom. I asked him, man, what the hell are you doing here eating your lunch? And he gave me the most convoluted explanation, which made even less sense to me. But as we became closer and closer, I realized that he had social anxiety and panic attacks while eating around lots of people. And man, I know this might sound crazy to a lot of people, but as a person who has been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, I can totally understand what is it like to have a panic attack when doing simple tasks like eating in front of your coworkers or just walking around the office. But anyway, the thing is that at one point, we became so close that he would only shake hands with me and fist bump everyone else. And of course, some people noticed the preferential treatment he was giving me, so they started gossiping and saying that he had a crush on me. And insecure me, of course, tried to avoid sitting anywhere near him because I didn't want to be seen with him. But honestly, he was such a funny guy. I couldn't help it but to laugh every time he would crack a joke at work. I'm so happy that 18-year-old me didn't let this gossiping and judging stop me from meeting this awesome guy, because later on we became so close that I got to meet his wife and son. His family cooked this delicious, authentic Italian pizza, and then he showed me his collections of drawings, paintings, and real-size clay sculptures that he had made. Man, no wonder people thought this guy was weird. He was a genius. And I'm so glad I learned this lesson early in life, because when I first came to China, I ran into a few angry foreigners who would judge everyone who would do things slightly different than them. For example, I'll never forget this, but it was my first week in China. I didn't know many people back then, but one day I met this person who had been in China for a year. And man, I swear to God, I don't know what's up with these foreigners who have been living in China for a relatively long period of time, that as soon as they know that you're new to China, they have this moment of euphoria in where they gotta warn you about everything and everyone in China. And honestly, I don't think some of them really care about you or your well-being. And I'm telling you this because I've been that type of foreigner too. I mean, I even started a podcast to tell you about China. So, yeah. But anyway, why am I mentioning this? Well, because this person that I met was extremely negative and cynical. The first thing this person did was to warn me about people from specific countries. And this is why you got to be extra careful with how much power you give to other people's opinions. Because I remember my university would let you pick your roommates, and the list would include their nationalities. And when I was scanning through the list, I could only hear the voice of that person warning me in my head. Then I realized that all the roommates with quote-unquote good nationalities were taken. So I just picked a random guy from a country I knew nothing about and crossed my fingers. In my head, I felt that the gossiping and the prejudicial comments this person made were intended to protect me and give me guidance. But it had the opposite effect, because even though my roommate was nice, my confirmation bias was in control. In my mind, I would try hard to find evidence in the behavior of my roommate that would confirm what I had been told before. By the way, can you guess the nationality of my roommate? If not, hang in there. I'll tell you in a bit. The thing is that my roommate would start bringing his countrymates home to play video games, and I felt slightly annoyed by that, even though they were quiet and polite, and they would always take off their shoes before getting into our room. Can you guess now? It's not Korean or Japanese, by the way. So the video game sessions suddenly turned into beer and food parties in the hallway with the song Make Book Te by the band Bedroom Audio playing in the background. One day, I convinced myself that I was feeling annoyed by their noise on a Friday night, even though I was wearing earbuds and I couldn't hear a thing. So I went to confront them about the noise, but deep inside I knew that I was just jealous because I wasn't taking part in their amazing party. And when I opened my mouth to complain, they just shoved a bottle of beer in my mouth and put a lettuce leaf on my hand along with some ground meat and spicy sauce. Long story short, I had a blast. This was a great lesson because my judgment was isolating me from the amazing people of Laos. Yes, to my Lao friends, I miss you. I miss you old people so much. Thank you for treating me like one of your own. Yeah, but it's terrifying to think how this one person's prejudice can influence other people's judgments of others in such a negative way. The same person, this one person that I'm talking about, also told me that there was no way I was going to pass the Chinese test known as HSK, more specifically HSK 5 in a year. There are 6 levels, but now 9. But anyway, it was very hard to achieve. Apparently, in her eyes, it was impossible because she had tried to and failed. And you know what? This time she was totally right because I didn't pass it in a year. I passed it in 8 months. But still, this person's poor judgment managed to intimidate me and make me doubt about my own abilities. Do you remember how at the beginning of the episode I mentioned how I used to be a bit judgmental about talkative people and this one teacher who made fun of Westerners in class? Well, when I talked about it with my therapist, she just listened to my rant quietly while taking notes and nodding her head. And when I finished, she asked me, is there anything about these 2 types of people that you also dislike about yourself? Holy crap, man. Of course, it made a lot of sense to me. I didn't like talkative people because even though talking too much is generally perceived as annoying by everyone, I was also scared to be perceived by others as annoying, so I would project this negative image of myself onto others. And the same thing applied to this other annoying teacher. Even though he would make annoying comments, be super judgmental sometimes. For example, he would say things like, how can you afford to study in China if your country is so poor? Or if you couldn't answer his questions, he would say, you're so cute, with this big stupid smile on his face. But I was no different than this guy. I think I also had a big stupid smile sometimes. And this was a revealing moment for me because after I realized that even though it's okay to make jokes, it's not okay to make jokes at the expense of others. By the way, in psychology, taking unwanted emotions or traits you don't like about yourself and attributing them to someone else is known as projection. I'll leave a link in the description of this episode if you want to know more about projection. Another type of judgment you will experience in China as a student is the type of judgment that comes from figures of authority, such as your tutor or teachers. Look, I might be wrong about this, but I have the feeling that Chinese teachers who spend time living abroad or studying abroad can have more empathy towards international students than those who had never had the chance to study abroad. I think most of my teachers were empathetic and lenient, but there were a few who had insane expectations about students, and many judgments come from those teachers who make the most assumptions about you. For example, I remember this teacher yelling at my classmate for not bringing his book during the third week of class. But what she had no idea about was the fact that this classmate could barely afford the plane ticket to come to China, and the scholarship stipend was late as usual, and he had to choose between eating food or eating his books. Another thing teachers can judge you for is for your lack of commitment in class. And I know some of them can be genuinely concerned about you, but some others simply label you as lazy because they assume that besides studying, you have nothing else to do when you go back home. When in reality, you could be dealing with depression, the death of a loved one, financial struggle, anxiety, or loneliness. So listen, my piece of realistic advice for today's episode is, just like my therapist asked me before, when judging others, especially when you're outspoken about your judgments through gossiping, ask yourself if there is something in this person's behavior or trait that you also have and have negative feelings about. Are you trying to separate yourself from your deepest feelings of shame by judging others? Asking yourself these questions might not turn you into a monk who believes that we are beings of light, but it'll help you reflect a little bit and get a better perspective of why you judge others and why other people might be judging you. My genuine encouragement for you today is know that judging others is a natural behavior. It's just us trying to figure out other people, but judgment can be harmful, especially when it's ill-intentioned and based on prejudice. Judging is our animal instinct that help us make sure that we're safe and that no one's going to attack us when we're not looking. But if there's a situation we can't understand or figure out, our first instinct is to criticize, punish, and isolate this person from everyone else. This judgment usually remains in our heads, but we can sometimes vocalize it in the form of gossip. And the thing about gossip is that it makes you feel powerful for a couple of minutes because all of a sudden you have this piece of crucial information about this person and you become the center of attention. And look, I understand good-natured banter between friends, but if your remarks have the potential to harm someone's reputation, you might want to reflect a little bit before you speak. Believe me when I say that there are better ways to live your life than simply going around judging others. You deserve to live a better life, and even though judging others is inevitable, I can promise you that unlike being a total jerk, being kind and mindful about the things you say or think about others will most likely bring positive outcomes in your life. I always like to finish my episodes with a quote, and today's quote is by French philosopher Albert Camus, and it reads, "People hasten to judge in order not to be judged themselves." Let me repeat that. People hasten to judge in order not to be judged themselves. Alright, that's it for today. Next week I will talk about lacking motivation in China. Because lacking motivation usually means that you're lacking something else too. What could that be? I'll let you know next week. Before I let you go, I gotta remind you that you can now listen to full episodes not only on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, and where you can find me as China University Student Advisor. But you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as chinauniversitypodcast, and also on Twitter as chinauniversitypodcast. If you have any feedback, comments, or topic ideas, please feel free to contact me on your favorite social media platform or send an email to chinapodcast@outlook.com. You have just listened to China University Podcast. This was Chimsy, your student advisor. I'll see you next week.